So it looks like we're going to get to play here, which is nice. And yeah, I think this hand is good enough. We're missing the token generators themselves, but got a decent amount of interaction. Vetted pools means probably against blue-black control. That's the most popular of the vetted pools decks, but we don't know for sure, of course. Okay, drowned catacomb plus search makes that even more likely to be the case. And this is a matchup that isn't great game one. I could have gone with the start there. Chose not to get the map into play. Not sure it's correct, but hoping that this procession does get into play. Pretty much banking on that, honestly. It may not. But it looks like it is. It looks like it's going to make its way into play. So now when we are able to start to finish, we can make 4 tokens rather than 2. We don't even have to crack the Renegade map. In fact, I'm not going to. I'm just going to pass here. We of course have 4 removal spells, which is way too many for this matchup. And our opponent's playing this game kind of weird. Well, I think we should go for the start here. So our opponent has the Field of Ruin, which is why I actually don't want our opponent. I don't want to flip Legion's Landing this turn. Rather flip it next turn, I think, if we're able to get this to resolve. That's obviously the first step. But these tokens definitely have the potential to win us the game. And wow, it looks like our opponent's just going to concede. So we were able to stick a couple of key threats, and even though we had 4 essentially dead cards in hand, we were able to get that win. So we are playing against a control deck here, which means we're going to want to add these duresses into our deck. Of course, a card like Fatal Push and also Fumigate is just not where we want to be here. So I like the treasure maps. We want these permanents that stick in play, like Hidden Stockpile, Anointed Procession, Vraska, these sorts of sticky permanents, Legion's Landing, that a lot of them are enchantments and artifacts, and our opponent doesn't have removal for enchantments and artifacts. It's just creatures. So that puts us in a pretty nice spot. Angel of Sanctions is it's another place we can go. Lost Legacy is not necessary for this matchup. The best thing you can really name is like a Scarab God, but even then, there aren't actually that many creatures Scarab God can bring back in, even if it gets into play. So I like boarding out the Fatal Pushes and the Fumigates, and boarding in some of our good cards against control. So, yep, I think the matchup actually gets better post-board. If our opponent had the counterspell, which I thought our opponent probably did have the counterspell, but sometimes, our opponent just didn't have counterspells for non-creatures. Our opponent probably had cards like Essence Scatter in hand, and we never played a creature there. So it ended up working out just fine. Here's a Duress. That's going to take away our treasure map and leave us with a hand that looks quite a bit worse now, with just the 2 Anointer Priests. Okay, but there's a nice draw. So we found a copy of Legion's Landing, so we're going to be able to make a vampire right away, and we're really looking to flip that ASAP. And we're just playing our cards out. There's really not, a ton of stuff we're going to try to play around, per se. We just want to get as many permanents into play as quickly as possible. And our opponent's cycling a center rather than countering the Anointer Priest, possibly looking for a land, but our opponent does have 3 lands in play, so if they were looking for a land, they were able to find that. So our opponent's going to get rid of a token. Sure, that's fine. And I think we want to keep the Evolving Wilds in hand in case we draw a hidden stockpile. We want to be able to get a free token, essentially, which Evolving Wilds allows you to do because it enables Revolt. And there's one of basically the reason why we won the first game, start to finish. So that's a nice card to have here. And I think we just go ahead and use it now that our opponent's tapped out. We definitely don't want it to run into a counterspell, because now we have 4. Now that we have 4 creatures in play, we're in a spot where even if our opponent has 1 single removal spell, we can still flip the Legion's Landing through that. Search for a Scanta, sure, you got it. And now I am going to play the Evolving Wilds. I think getting the Forest, in case we draw Vraska, is a good enough reason to have this Evolving Wilds in play. And it looks like our opponent milled a Duress right there. And now Field of Ruin is kind of annoying. And our opponent is going to activate the Field of Ruin. Makes sense. So now we actually have the Forest anyway. So I don't think we need to use the Evolving Wilds. If our opponent has a sweeper like a Bantu's Reckoning, that would clearly be very good in this spot. Not something I'm prepared to play around, though. Alright, Essence Extraction. I mean, it does gain our opponent some life, so if our opponent has managed to find something like a Torrential Gearhulk, that's going to be annoying, but you know what? We do have that finish, so we do have a potential answer to a creature if we need it with the back half of the finish. So this is a close game. Our opponent's able to flip into Escanta the Sunken Ruin, so that's kind of annoying. And yeah, I'm just going to go for the thinning of the deck in the spot. Sure, I mean, why not? We drew it. Why not play the Hidden Stockpile? And it's just going to get countered. Makes sense. Looks like our opponent's going to be taking this hit. We're able to find a negate, though. But, hey, these Anoina Priests and Warriors, they may just go the distance here. Like, even though our opponent has more cards in hand, has a Scanta going, you know, we've got these one-power dudes. It turns out one-power dudes are not that easy to deal with. There's Vraska. I'm going to go ahead and attack first before figuring out the next play. We know about negate. So our opponent does have negate up. Which is pretty unfortunate. Because we want to be able to play Vraska. And it looks like our opponent's going for Essence Extraction. That's going to get rid of a warrior. Now our opponent can block. We don't have enough lands to be able to do everything we'd like to. So I'm going to try to get the Vraska into play next turn. Our opponent's going to negate this. So that was a pretty good turn for our opponent. They had exactly what they needed with the Torrential Gearhulk. So now we're kind of just hoping to resolve the Vraska. I'm gonna go for Legion's Landing before casting it, though. Maybe our opponent, maybe it baits out a counter spell. Or a Torrential Gearhulk, it looks like. So this Gearhulk is going to be able to find negate. So that gets negated, but now we are going to be able to resolve this Vraska Relic Seeker. And the question becomes what we actually want to do with it. We can destroy one of these Gearhulks, but I think I'd rather just create, well, if we create a token, it's a close spot. If we create a token with Menace, our opponent may just attack the Vraska next turn. Yeah, I guess we do want to get one of these Gearhulks off the battlefield. So let's do that. And if our opponent attacks Vraska, we're just going to want to chump it. Hopefully our opponent does not have Vraska's Contempt. There's a Disallow. So our opponent was able to find Disallow with the Askanda activation. Now another activation. We'll see what this one can find. But the fact that our opponent has that Disallow, it's pretty unlikely that we're going to get anything major into play here. Shafet Dunes is a pretty good draw. I'm going to go ahead and plus Vraska this turn. But I don't think we have any good attacks. So, yep, just going to pass the turn. Our opponent can also disallow the Shafet Dunes activation, by the way. But our opponent's still going draw more cards, activate Askanda, draw more cards. But we have the edge on board. Is this a Vraska's Contempt? No, it's a Vizier of Many Faces, but that's going to be able to copy Torrential Gearhulk. Possibly for some more cards, possibly for an Essence Extraction. We'll have to see what our opponent has in mind here. Looks like just the Hieroglyphic Illumination to draw more cards. So we have a bit of a decision in terms of activating the Vraska. I think I'm going to try to just cast this treasure map first and see how our opponent reacts to that. It's going to get negated, so that means that our opponent still has a copy of Disallow in hand, which means I think we just go ahead and tick Vraska up. And still no good attacks. Just going to pass back. That's going to give our opponent the opportunity to activate Askanda here. And there's the Vraska's Contempt. Exactly what our opponent was hoping to draw. So that's going to be able to deal with our Planeswalker. Alright, there's Anointed Procession. Well, sure. Let's see if it resolves. That's going to get disallowed. We have Shafet Dunes. We could activate the Shafet Dunes and try to attack for a decent amount of damage. I think that's the play here. So maybe if our opponent has another disallow, they may use it. If our opponent does not have another disallow, they are going to be forced to... Well, it depends. they also are looking for additional removal. But if they don't have another disallow, they can go block, block, and take. They can block 2 Anointer Priests, I think is the best block, and take 8. So we can't actually deal lethal this turn. So it looks like that is what's going to happen. 2 Anointer Priests are getting blocked, but you know what? The reason for that is because these pirate tokens that we made with Vraska, they have Menace. So we still have a glimmer of hope here. Not a glimmer of genius, but a glimmer of hope, yes. And we're still at 37 life. We were able to use up our opponent's disallow that turn, but now our opponent has to be thinking Field of Ruin, can get rid of Shafet Tunes. Escana, you can continue to activate that. Look for some more removal. So, yeah, I mean, we at least put our opponent in a tough spot here. See what they can find off this activation. Okay, it's going to be a censor, so that's basically, they're just going to be able to cycle that censor, but we're pretty happy about that, it being the find. And we're really banking on our opponent just not drawing a way to get one of these 2 pirates off the board. And it looks like here's a main phase activation of a scan of the Sunken Ruin. That's going to give us more information. Although it's a glimmer, so now our opponent's going deeper into their deck. Looking for a card like a Vraska's Contempt, like an Essence Extraction. Probably our opponent sideboarded out all of their Fatal Pushes, I would guess. Because they're not that great in this matchup. Here's going to be a cycle. Censor's going to get cycled here. And really now our opponent needs a Vraska's Contempt or an Essence Extraction because they're also going to need to have a way to gain life in this situation. Sure, you can activate Field of Ruin if you want to. Nope. Found a Vraska's Contempt. They found the card. Now we are back into a spot needing to top deck right here. And nope. Just an Anointer Priest. We can activate the Shafet Dunes, but our opponent still double blocks the Pirate and goes to 1. So we did not. We were hoping that our opponent did not find a Vraska's Contempt. Unfortunately, they were able to. And now, yeah, not a good spot for us. Our opponent's basically been able to dig through their entire deck. There's a Bantu's Last Reckoning getting revealed. That's a scary sweeper, but our opponent does have 2 creatures in play. Contraband Kingpin. Okay, sure. But I'm not sure if our opponent has good attacks. No. So we're not actually out of it being at 39. Cast out, do we just go ahead and try to use that here? We could. So if it were to resolve, we could get an opposing Gearhulk, but nah, I'm just going to pass here. Our opponent definitely may have another Torrential Gearhulk. And now is an opportunity to cast the cast out now that our opponent has completely tapped out. So I'm gonna want to cast out the Vizier of Many Faces. And we may just run our opponent out of gas in a weird... This is really weird. This is a weird game. I wonder how many Scarab Gods our opponent left in, or how our opponent is going to try to close this game out. Alright, I mean, sure, I'm going to cast this Anointed Procession. I'm not sure if it's going to resolve. But if it does, it would make sense because we have no way to generate tokens. But it looks like our opponent probably has a hand with a decent amount of counter magic. So there's a disallow. But that's why we didn't cast that cast out main phase. Is we waited for our opponent to completely tap out and then play that cast out, getting one of our opponent's key creatures off the board. But it looks like our opponent did keep in a number of Torrential Gearhulks because here's another copy. And this is, yeah, this may be enough to close out the game. Yeah, I'm worried that it is. Although our opponent's drawing more cards, so realistically, now decking is coming into consideration. I wonder if our opponent, well, I don't know exactly what's in our opponent's deck, but I wonder what types of win conditions our opponent has left. And if this is it, or if there's another Gearhulk or Scarab God or something along those lines that our opponent still has. Looks like it's going to be a Vizier of Many Faces. So our opponent likely just has enough gas. Unfortunately. And now our opponent's at a healthy enough life total that we're probably, and there's a Scarab God as well. So yeah, our opponent did have plenty of gas. And yeah, I'm just going to go to the next game. Let's go to a game 3, shall we? Not going to wait for these 4 copies of Torrential Gearhulk or what have you to go the distance. In terms of sideboarding, pretty happy actually with this configuration for the most part. Yeah, not gonna change it up. Don't think play draw matters enough to want to switch things up. Still have these duresses that we didn't draw. I don't believe we drew a single duress that game. Now we drew a duress. Not an amazing hand. I think it's good enough to keep though. We can also cycle a cast out if we if we want to. I think we actually want to cycle one cast out here. So I'm not going to lead on the duress. I'm going to let our opponent have one draw. And that's going to give us a better... If we cast it on turn 2, it's going to give us a better idea of what's in our opponent's hand. Although we drew an Anointer Priest, which now there is some incentive to cast. Yeah, I think we cast it. Our opponent might have a Scanta here, which it's annoying, but I think we'd rather just get some pressure on the board. Yep, search for a Scanta is going to be the play, but now we actually have a window to use the start to finish, and I'm just going to go for it here. I mean, we saw one copy of Bantu's Last Reckoning, but I think it's still worth it just to get these creatures onto the board. We have cast out also, which we can use to deal with the search, potentially. Yeah, I think I'm going to go for this duress. It might get negated, but we'll see. Okay, it's not going to get negated. We actually see that our opponent does have Bantu's Last Reckoning in hand, but did not have double black to cast it. Also Censor and Hieroglyphic Illumination and Vizier of Many Faces. So a lot of stuff in hand. The Bantu's Reckoning stands out as the most dangerous card because if our opponent is able to untap and then play it, I mean, it's definitely not. Doesn't put us in a great spot. We do have the Anointer Priest, which we can use. The Hieroglyphic Illumination is good too because it draws our opponent's card. It draws our opponent cards. If we let our opponent Bantu's Last Reckoning, it means they're not untapping. Huh. Yeah, I think we still just have to take the Bantu's Last Reckoning, unfortunately. I don't want to take it here, but I think it's still the correct choice. If we had one more land in play and we're threatening Vraska next turn, for sure, I think that we let our opponent have the Bantu's Reckoning because then our opponent's tapped out and we could land Vraska, but that's not the world we're living in at the moment. So our opponent's probably just going to go for the Hieroglyphic Illumination here. And we can cast out this search for Askanta. I think it's probably correct to do so. Our opponent is going to tap out here for the Illumination. If we use the cast out, it does make us more vulnerable to Torrential Gearhulk. That's the downside to it. All right, I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna keep the cast out. It also means that if our opponent draws more searches, they're not good. And I think Gearhulk is just the card we're worried about the most. There's a hidden stockpile, okay. So we know about the Censor. We're not just going to jam the Vraska into play, that's for sure. But we can cast this hidden stockpile. There's the Censor getting cycled. And it looks like the stockpile is actually gonna resolve. Interesting. Sure, I'm gonna go ahead and sacrifice a warrior here. Scry this land to the bottom. So the search is going to be able to flip now. So, like last game, our opponent's going to be able to get a bunch of activations off of Scanta, the Sunken Ruin. Here's Contraband Kingpin. And the Scarab God. Okay, so a pretty big turn for our opponent there. But we have the capability to have a big turn of our own if we want to. So we can play Vraska. That's one option. We also have the start to finish. We can cast out the Scarab God and finish the Kingpin. That actually seems like a pretty nice turn. Okay. I think that's our best option. So now we're able to get in for 2, and we're going to get the Revolt trigger because we sacrificed the Anointer Priest to the finish. Main phase. Here's a main phase Torrential Gearhawk. And that's going to target, it looks like a Hieroglyphic Illumination. Well, we could go for Vraska, but the worry is, of course, that it could also be running into an opposing negate. Which I think there's a decent chance that our opponent actually has in hand, considering how they played the last turn. Well, I'm still going to go for the Vraska. Worst case scenario, we're getting a negate out of our opponent's hand. Best case scenario, it's just great. Just an amazing turn for us. Alright, we got a negate out of our opponent's hand. Seemed like our opponent had it, but... So we're going to be able to get a Scry here. Anointer Priest. I'm going to bottom that. So we have the Anointer Priest in our graveyard. That's kind of the one play we have access to. Besides, also we can also use these Shafet tunes. So our opponent's on 6, and we're threatening to just once again. It's a very similar situation to the last game. We're threatening to swarm our opponent with tokens. Notably, our opponent has not had any opportunity to activate Escanta, the Sunken Ruin. Alright, so our opponent's going to be able to draw 2 cards here. We'll see what they're able to find. There's a Vizier. Okay, so we already knew about that. That's going to copy the Torrential Gearhawk. And our opponent's going to be able to draw some more cards, but this is going to create an opening. Hopefully we can find something. Some way to punish our opponent. Just a duress. Well, I think we want to use it. See what's going on in our opponent's hand. So we're going to get a Vraska's Contempt. We see that our opponent has another Torrential Gearhawk. We don't have any great attacks. I'm just gonna sacrifice a servo, get a scry, and then bring back the Anointed Priest. So our opponent can get back Vraska's Contempt if they choose to do that. With the Torrential Gearhawk. They also have Negate, so our opponent could just pass the turn here. Holding up Negate and also Azcanta. So I think it's not a great spot for us. But yeah, pretty unfortunate situation. Maybe we should not have ran out that Vraska. Maybe the correct play was to just take a more conservative line. But if that Vraska resolves right there, we're just gonna win the game. We're gonna be able to get rid of the Gearhawk, get in, and just have an overwhelming board position. Although it looks like our opponent has activated a Scanta, and now thought we saw an untapped land. I think did our opponent already play a land for the turn? It'd be weird if our opponent elected not to have 6 mana up for Torrential Gearhawk in this situation. And of course, the search for Azcanta that our opponent found off Azcanta, the Sunken Ruin, is more or less useless. We can use both the Ifnir Deadlands and the Shifet Dunes to our advantage as a way to enable Revolt. So that's something that our opponent is likely thinking about as well, because if we can get enough servos into play, it's possible that we can activate Shifet Dunes and maybe just squeeze a win out somehow. If our opponent gets in with both Gearhawks, it's definitely aggressive. Looks like it's going to be 1, so we're just going to take that. Take the hit. And of course, not the draw we wanted. If we activate Shifet Dunes, our opponent can Gearhawk of Vraska's Contempt, going up to 8, and then block 2 of our creatures. So that does not seem very good. Although, we actually have the ability to sacrifice in response to that, so our opponent doesn't gain the life. But our opponent still has would have 2 Gearhawks in play in that situation. So that doesn't seem great. I'm going to go ahead and use an Ifnir Deadlands on this Torrential Gearhawk, and that's going to be another way to trigger Revolt. But likely this Torrential Gearhawk gets flashed into play here. But it looks like instead our opponent's going for a Field of Ruins activation to get rid of one of the Shifettunes, which I don't mind. And then our opponent can now also cast something like a Glimmer. It looks like our opponent's not casting something in addition. Instead, just going for the destroy 2 Shifettunes play. There's a Duress. Might as well cast it, see what's going on. Alright, so our opponent just is pretty much all in on these Torrential Gearhulks, which, to be fair, is working out pretty well in our opponent's favor at the moment. There's an Argyll's Bloodfast. Yeah, I'm going to keep that on top. And it looks like our opponent just doesn't want to cast that third Torrential Gearhulk. And I don't believe anything was found off that activation of Iskana, the Sunken Ruin. So if we're able to get this Argyll's... Well, we're not going to be able to get the Argyll's Bloodfest into play because our opponent does have Torrential Gearhulk plus Negate available. Alright, well, I guess we just take the hit here. We could just attack with everything. Sure, why not? Let's go for the attack. We're not in a good spot. The one thing it does is it forces our opponent to, if they want the Torrential Gearhulk in play, they have to flash it in right now. And this has been a long match, for sure. Angel of Sanctions, sure. Yeah, I'm going to keep that on top. And unfortunately, our opponent found a disallow there. And now, here's another Gearhulk, although I wonder if our opponent should have actually... Our opponent probably should have flashed in that Gearhulk earlier. Because now we're still kind of threatening lethal here. I mean, we have five creatures to our opponent's 3. So our opponent needs another removal spell. It's likely that they have it. Well, now they're attacking with everything. This is kind of weird. It's a weird attack. Because typically blue-black control is not a deck that has any sort of direct damage. Well, I'm just going to take it. Alright, our opponent's able to use Essence Extraction on their own creature to go up to 5. Then here's a Vizier of Many Faces. Targeting Essence Extraction. Which makes sense. This all makes sense. And so this is going to mean our opponent's at a safe enough life total. Our opponent's played this game well. I have to admit that. Gotta give props to your opponent. They have the disallow here. I'm still going to play out this Angel. But yeah, it's gonna run into disallow. And we're just dead to these Gearhulks, I think. We can jump off for a turn. So now we have 4 blockers to our opponent's 4 attackers, but if we're forced into blocking, and there's a Vraska's Contempt, so our opponent can now contempt a servo and get in for the win. So that's actually going to be the match here.